Welcome to Anita Talks History and Genealogy. Today I'm going to speak on my last book, which is Minqua Unami Okehocking in the Downriver Nations. There is a Facebook page by that name, and my book is available through Amazon or through myself. And also check out A.L. Will's publications, alwillspub.com. That is my website. And it has all of my books. I've written 7 books, Notes and Documents of Free Persons of Color, and a revised edition of Notes and Documents of Free Persons of Color. Also, Pieces of the Quilt, which is a book about my family lines. It's Pieces of the Quilt, the Mosaic of an African-American Family. And then Black Minqua, The Life and Times of Henry Green. And also Along the Rappahannock, which is a book that I wrote regarding an entire tribe of my ancestors, where the adults were sold as slaves to Antigua. And then, A Nation of Flaws, Just Us in the Homeland, which kind of veered away from the genealogy and history and spoke more on how they policed the bodies, our persons of the Native Americans and the Africans that were brought here as slaves. And then Minqua Unami Okehocking and the Downriver Nations. So those are my books, and Minqua Unami Okehocking and the Downriver Nations was just a culmination of my research that dealt specifically with the Native Americans and how they were treated, from what I learned, not only from my mother, but from my researching and asking questions about why we who were natives in Pennsylvania were not allowed to claim our native heritage. Basically, my mother, on both sides of her family, which is like my grandfather's side, they were native to Pennsylvania and to that entire region. On my grandfather's side, there are the surnames of Martin and Johnson. And if you look at Chief Brand, who was the head of the Iroquois Federation for many years, he had a sister named Molly, and or they called her Molly. So they called him Joseph. That wasn't his name. They, meaning the Europeans who came in, were killing the parents of the children and taking the children to mission schools. So my ancestors, who were part of the Iroquois Federation, were Mohawk. Chief Joseph and his sister Molly were raised in mission schools. Molly and Chief Joseph were taken to Methodist homes and raised there after their parents were killed by the colonial soldiers. That is the part of history you will never hear. You probably may never even hear their names, other than the fact that I'm speaking them right now. But if you look them up, you'll learn the story. But my direct ancestor, Molly, was in the household of Sir William Johnson, who was a British naval officer. She was the housekeeper, and she wound up having 7 children with him, and one of whom, William, is my direct ancestor, William Johnson. Okay, and he was named after his white father. So that side is white and native, and comes from England. And Mali's, after the Revolutionary War, the Iroquois Confederation fought on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War. Well, of course, Sir William Johnson was, the brother-in-law of Chief Joseph. So there was that connection. So they fought on the side of the British. And of course, the British lost, and they were ran out of America into Canada, out of the United States, what is now the United States, into Canada, and became part of the Onondaga Reservation. And their descendants continue to live on the Onondaga Reservation. But after the Revolutionary War, they started trickling back in. But when they came back in, they were classified as mulatto here in the United States, or rather in America. So this was, there was, after the Revolutionary War, there was the War of 1812. That's another British war that's very seldom spoken of. So we had ancestors in the Revolutionary War, and we had ancestors in the War of 1812 from Pennsylvania. But in the meantime, the natives who were just trying to stay out of the wars and what was going on with the colonial governments, were being slaughtered and being attacked by the settlers for their land. And so this caused a great deal of moving around by our ancestors. And one thing that was happening in Pennsylvania, Chester County, where my mother and her family on my grandfather's side, was that there was a lot of intermarriage or intermixing with the natives and the Europeans. So we have a lot of Quakers in our family, and we have some Dutch people in our family. And if you go to Pennsylvania, there's Quakers and there's Dutch people. And that side of our family intermixed with the natives. And guess who wound up with the land? So we're always speaking on how the natives were attacked and killed or moved off their land. We talk about sending them to reservations, but they don't talk about the intermixing. Sometimes there were marriages, and but the white people, those white folk, wound up with the land. And and in Chester County, some of them are still on the land, especially the Quakers. And one of the things that the Quakers did after the Civil War was the land that they occupied, which belonged to one of our Lenape native villages. They gave it to the AME Church, and the AME Church built their church there, and they have a graveyard there. And they don't even talk about the natives, that is built on a native village. It's, and so when I'm talking about Okehocking, George Washington met with then Chief Aliquippa, and she was the head of the Iroquois before Chief Joseph. So this was in like 1704. He met with her, and she was there on behalf of several native tribes. When I say Minqua Unami Okehocking, those were some of the tribes that were mentioned in the records that I found. And she told Washington that the tribes, that these people wanted to live peacefully on their land that was stolen from them. And so George Washington, granted her for the tribes 500 acres in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and they called it the Okehocking Spread, and they received a warrant for it. And so I know I have the warrant, so I know that happened. I could not find the patent because the patent is, means that, oh, this is their land, nobody could take it from it. But Washington promised that, not Washington, William Penn promised them that he was the overseer of that land at the time. He was sent by the crown to, be like the official voice of England. So he was the one that was promising the land to the native people. I'm sorry about that mistake. And William Penn signed away the land, 500 acres in Chester County, and he called it the Okehocking Spread. And there's a lot of information about that. And unfortunately, he went back to England. And when he went back to England, the settlers came on the land and started again killing off the natives or running the natives off. So that my ancestors were run off the land. Some of them ran back up into, some of them ran to Canada. Some of them, went to other states, and they left the region, and many of them were killed. So I believe that the Quakers did hide some of them out, because I have records showing that they were in I think it's Indiana, and there was a lot of natives that ran to Indiana at the time. They were leaving that area where the settlers were coming in and claiming the land and killing the natives, because there was no law against killing natives at that time. So the land that belonged to my native ancestors, or our native ancestors, was taken. And my mother would often tell me about that. And I would say, wow, there's so many cornfields out here that, and she would say, yeah, the natives taught them how to grow corn. And then they ran the natives off and made it against the law for the natives to grow corn. And so the crops that were growing, the ability or what it was needed to raise those crops, to grow those crops, was given to these Europeans, who then ran the natives off the land. And the last massacre of Native people was in 1765, when they, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, they killed off the Conestoga Indians. It was some children, women and children and elderly that had been left. The men were out, fighting. They were out, being chased. And so the women and children and elderly went down, and the sheriff in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, told them, we'll protect you. And they put them in a cell. And then this gang called the Paxton Gang went in and massacred them. And they buried them under the county jail and left them there. That was the last massacre, or the last recorded massacre but I can tell you that my ancestors who were in Lancaster County were hunted down, were not allowed to live in peace. Um, they lived up in the mountains in the area that their ancestors had lived in for thousands of years. And as the people came in from Europe, they would go up in the mountains with guns hunting my ancestors. Um, and another thing that my ancestors in Lancaster County did was to protect escaped slaves. If any escaped slave came through the mountains where they lived, they would protect them with their lives. And they would see that they got to Canada. So there was an underground railroad that ran through those mountains that even today Lancaster County will not talk about. And also, when there was poor whites that came, there was whites that came as servants. They had what they called indentured servitude for anyone that got, if you got in trouble in Europe or England, especially England, then you were sent to the colony. This was considered a penal colony. And so a lot of whites escaped up in the mountains, and they were protected by our ancestors too. So there was intermarriages and intermixing with the whites, the natives, and some of the escaped slaves that remained in the region. But when it come time to look for the census, it's going to tell you that these people were Negro. Sometimes they call them mulatto. They say mulatto, Negro, colored, Negro, or Black. On our birth certificates, they said we were colored. Me, my siblings, and I, and other people in the community were considered colored. So the natives were, caught in the crossfire of these white folks that wanted land, which is hungry for land, yet supposedly coming from a civilization. So if you're coming from a civilization, why do you need land? Why do you need to steal someone else's land and labor? Why do you need to steal someone else's resources if you're so civilized? There is no answer. They never answer that question, do they? Anyway, so that's part of Chester County. And then we have Delaware County. All of that region was part of what they would call the hunting grounds, or the villages. So some of the natives had villages, had long houses. In that region, they did not live in teepees. But they would set up, they had certain places they would be in the summer. And there's one county called Somerset County, Maryland. So, think about it. My mother told me that they would go there every summer, that her dad would take them down every summer to the river, and they would spend the summer in Somerset County, Maryland, at the falls of the river. And they would, go crabbing and just spend the summer living off the land. That is, a story that my mother told me. And then I found out that there was a tribe there that our ancestors came from called it's called the Manikan, Manikan. Not to be confused with Monacan, which I am a member of the Monacan Indian Nation. But this is the Manikins. And I believe that the Manikins were chased into Delaware because the settlers were coming into Maryland on the tribe's land and building churches. And after the churches, once they built the church, then they would start bringing the settlers from Europe and running the natives off. So they ran up into Delaware and became part of the Nanacoke and other tribes. And some of them just continued on up and went back into Canada. So, and Queen Aliquippa was a friend of George Washington. She knew George Washington. And they never talk about the females who were head of tribes. And there's actually a county named after Queen Aliquippa. Maybe because she was kind of brown skinned, but she was the one that, I call her my shero. And they said that she was probably Seneca. She could have been Seneca. She could have been Mohawk. They don't know really what she was, but she was certainly the leader of the Iroquois Confederation in the 1700s, a female. And so once she negotiated the land there, she set up a village in Lancaster County and met with Sir William Johnson, and also met with Washington. And there was 10,000 acres of land that was to be, it was called the, it was called the Conestoga Land Grant. The Conestoga Land Grant, 10,000 acres. And the same thing that happened with the 500 acres happened with the 10,000 acres. So these are just two bits of land that we know about in Pennsylvania, a place that says there's no Indian villages here. But underneath the dam, there's a Conestoga Dam in Lancaster County. They call it Coneweeda Dam or something, but it's a Conestoga Dam, part of the Schuylkill River. The Conestoga it's part of the Susquehanna River, I'm sorry. The Conestoga were an offshoot of the Susquehanna. So there's a dam there, and underneath that dam is an entire village. The Conestoga Village is under the dam that they built in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And my ancestors were Conestoga, Susquehanna. That part, and yes, Queen Aliquippa set up a camp. She met with Sir William Johnson, and she met with George Washington about getting land for the natives from that area. And they promised her land. My ancestors, Henry Green was one of them, his brothers, they were in the Civil War. And they were also part of the Christiana resistance, which took place on 9/11, 1851. But their ancestors are the ones that came before them, Thomas Green, all of them were in the mountains on the land that belonged to them. And the land was taken from them. So we're talking about land back. They don't want us to talk about land back. And it just boggles my mind how you can come here, take somebody's land, kill them for the land, or run them off the land, and then get hurt feelings because somebody's talking about land back. What kind of psyche has that kind of reasoning or thinking? Anyway, so this is, this was going on all over Pennsylvania. And it was going on throughout what's called the colonies, the 13 colonies. They were just taking land. And once they completed that, after the Revolutionary War, George Washington became a frontiersman. And they don't talk about that in history. Then they set out to kill off the natives or move them off their land to take the land, the rest of the land. And by the way, by that time, they had slaves that they were bringing from Africa. But many of the slaves were natives. So the native slaves and the African slaves were living in the same conditions. I guess if you were light enough, because I do have some light-skinned ancestors who were indentured service to George Washington. They were, they were mixed race. Some of them are related to the Washingtons. Some of them are blood related to Monroe, James Monroe. And, all around that place, that was Virginia, Westmoreland County. There was a lot of mulattoes running around in that county, okay? But if you were not white, you had no rights. So they could chip away at your rights. They could decide, oh, you're going to be an indentured servant. If you're a woman, you're indentured for 30 years. If you're a male, you're indentured for 20 years. And I wondered at one point, well, why would a woman get 30 years and a male only get 20 years? Well, they was going to work the male to death anyway. But the woman that got 30 years, any children she had would also be indentured. Females for 30 years, males for 20. That's the way they set it up. And this is the basis of my book, Minqua Unami Okehocking and the Downriver Nations, because at one time, before the colonial settlers came and the tribes were here, the tribes had their own agreements with each other as to whose land belonged to whom, and they respected each other's boundaries. They had totems so that you would know that you're entering Mohawk land, or you're entering Nanticoke land, or you're entering Susquehanna land. There was totems to tell you whose land you were on. And they came and they destroyed the totems, took away the totems, and redid the borders. Just like they did in Africa. They went and cut Africa up like a pie. Europe, giving each other a slice of the pie of Africa. They did the same thing here in the United States of America, what is now the United States of America. But let's say it like this. They did it to the Americas, which is actually called Turtle Island. And it's one landmass. It's a continent, just like Africa is a continent. Just like Europe is a continent. So they sliced it up, and Spain, Portugal, France, England, you name it, took a part of land that was occupied for thousands and thousands of years with no respect to the people that were originally here. And that's what my book is about. I talk about what happened to the natives. And also, I talk about the records that they left. I was able to find those records in Virginia and some in Pennsylvania and run the lines. I found a lot of records up in Canada too. Canada has records, and all of them are connecting or pieces of the puzzle that helped me to prove my ancestry, helped me to unravel the mess that they made of our heritage and to understand that we are the people of the land. Thank you.